West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
I look at Russia. Can we give a round of applause for Russia? Yes. Absolutely, absolutely.
The happy cheers for Russia and Putin at a far-right political conference. That was just this weekend. I quoted former Obama aide Sheikh Kominduri. He is my guest tonight. Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you, Ari.
We quoted you in looking at the roots of this because it goes way beyond Trump. And it has to be in a time of all of these problems and some unpredictable developments, I would say, in America in the last 5 years. Particularly strange to see the party of Joe McCarthy at the extreme edge of the Red Scare, or Ronald Reagan at more of the muscular foreign policy plank, go to cheering Putin as he invades Ukraine. Your breakdown.
Yeah, I think it's very important to note that the GOP admiration for Putin actually predates Donald Trump. He did not necessarily initiate it or lead it when it really began. And the reason it began is because in many ways, Vladimir Putin's Russia really exemplifies a lot of the ideas that Republicans talk about. Russia is the ideal red state. And I mean red as in Republican, not necessarily red as in communist. Russia is a fossil fuel economy. It is a country where the religious right has a tremendous power in making social policy, which you discussed when it came to LGBTQ issues. It is a country that is a militaristic a military powerhouse, perhaps maybe not as much as we thought so before this invasion, but they are a country that actually spends more of their GDP on the military than the United States does. It is a ethno-state that prioritizes the identity of white Russians. It is a country where democracy has been successfully rolled back and an alpha male leader is now in place. In all of these areas, we are seeing Republicans articulate a lot of these ideas. Vladimir Putin has put them in practice, which is why so many of them have admired him all these years.
And we look at the strong nature of the right-wing media machine. I don't know what that would have done in the Reagan era. In many ways, he was, of course, a very effective communicator, the first Hollywood president, etc. But whatever you want to say about Reagan's policies, he had some. And he had a view of trying to box in through arms control and arms escalation. So, both mechanisms, hard power as well as soft, which we were discussing earlier in the hour, ways to deal with Gorbachev and the Soviet Union. We don't see any of that here in the discussion about Russia and Putin. As I put it, it's all at a GQ reality TV level. And I mentioned that in showing a little bit of Tucker Carlson, who I just want to say before I show this clip, we know from Tucker Carlson's writing that he is not this dumb. We know that
Right.
he is pitching a level of foreign policy analysis that is far beneath his ability. Call this the soft bigotry of expectations of Tucker Carlson from 10 years ago,
Right.
if you will. But he knows what he's doing when he does this. Take a look.
Democrats in Washington have told you have a patriotic duty to hate Vladimir Putin. It's not a suggestion, it's a mandate. It might be worth asking yourself, since it is getting pretty serious, what is this really about? Why do I hate Putin so much? Has Putin ever called me a racist?
Che?
Well, what's really interesting is I remember when conservatives criticized Muhammad Ali when he took the Olympic torch in 1996 at the Olympics, and they criticized him for his opposition to the Vietnam War, if you remember, because he said, no Viet Cong ever used a racial slur against him. It's interesting that is the exact logic that Tucker Carlson is now using to really justify this invasion. And we have to remember Muhammad Ali never, in no way, really supported, the North Korean.
That's wild. I hadn't thought. I don't know if I've heard anyone else draw that connection. Muhammad Ali's memorable phrase, but yes, that it's sort of being flipped in a weird right-wing perversion, which is fascinating when you say that. What do you think of the breakdown of Tucker trying to convince people that there is no substantive reason to have adversaries abroad? I mean, as if you would just accept all foreign leaders and not have any U.S.-based interests. How does that truck with American exceptionalism or America First or any of that?
Well, it's completely morally bankrupt, and it's completely the opposite of what Republicans and conservatives have talked about, really going back to the Cold War era. I mean, Tucker Carlson said just because it doesn't affect him, therefore America should have no role. It should stay out. But I think it's actually even more insidious if you think about like the history with Tucker and Viktor Orban and the Republicans in general, in how much they have admired Putin over the years. One of the big aspects was that Vladimir Putin's Russia is very much the opposite of Barack Obama's America. Barack Obama was somebody who believed in diversity, democracy, a knowledge-based economy. He very much was comfortable being a gentleman leader, not a Putinish thug. The Republicans didn't like that model, and they went and found a Putin of their own in Donald Trump. And that's exactly that's someone who they still admire, and that's exactly where they went. And that's where Tucker still wants to go. That's why he talks up Vladimir Putin, Viktor Orban, and these other dictators now.
Yeah, you make a very subtle point about the sort of elevation of that version of their politics abroad. Have you seen The Great on Hulu yet?
No, I have not. You're talking about Catherine the Great, that miniseries about Catherine the Great?
They have a character it's a satirical view, and it's all of old Russia of a different era, but they have a religious character from the sort of the imagined Russian Orthodox Church who's very against any reforms, science, art, the future. And at one point he's scripted saying, why does everyone always talk about the future like it's an improvement? It may be a decline, which is a traditional, sometimes conservative view. Buckley and others talk that way. And you seem to be arguing that in part this sort of right-wing obsession or fascination with these certain places, as you call them, ethno-nationalist, and also kind of throwbacks to, again, someone who Donald Trump ran on Reagan's slogan. The plagiarized slogan of Reagan was "Make America Great Again," which is a throwback, the idea that for some people, the 50s in the right-wing fantasy were better than today, Jay.
Yeah, and that is always a hallmark of conservative thinking. It's always the idea that the past was somehow better and that we need to reach back to the past and find models for the future, if you will. And that's, it's interesting that last night, one of the responses the Republicans made to Biden's State of the Union was basically saying, drill, baby, drill. I mean, that's more or less what Governor Reynolds was saying when she said we need more oil and more gas production. Fossil fuel economies of the kind that Russia has actually lend themselves to social conservatism. We see that with the Middle East. We see that with Red America here. That is actually a thing that we should really keep in mind when we talk about climate change and fossil fuel economies. It's not just about air pollution and climate change. I would also argue it has some level of protecting democracy and creating a better future for people, which is why I think Republicans are so staunchly talking about coal mining jobs, fossil fuel economies. Vladimir Putin, very much Russia, John McCain said, is a gas station masquerading as a country.
It is Thursday, the 3rd of March of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, a little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Yes, it's getting pretty spicy out there. And are we in a world war? Is it that yet? Everybody says, well, we can't use NATO for what it was supposed to be used for, to keep the Soviet Union, or Russia in this case, from expanding its borders in a violent, warlike way. Because if we do, then it'll be World War III. Well, I don't know. What are we in? Okay, this guy's going to say there's a Sudetenland in every nation in the world because somebody speaks Russian there. Yeah, they speak Russian, but can they write in Cyrillic? That's the big question. That's right. Yeah, when people say, I read it in Russian, no, you read it in Cyrillic. Damn you. I guess we'll be learning a lot more about Russia than what we did during the Cold War. Because that's how it works in America. That's how we learn geography. Is when we go to war with someone. How many people could have pointed out Ukraine on the map before all this happened? Well, I think a lot of people did, because Trump tried to bribe Zelensky. You need some arms that were promised to you and were written into law by Congress, and we're supposed to deliver them on a date certain. You want those? Well, can you do me a favor, though? And now Trump's out there. I guess he's turned on Vlad, because he owes Vlad a lot. But he probably thinks Vlad's a little preoccupied right now, and he can probably slip by on what he owes him. Because Donnie still owes Vlad lots and lots of money. All that money that he laundered through all of his properties for his friends, for Vlad's friends, all of that is still not enough. That's how much Trump owes. And I'm just talking about the casinos. Wait until he starts wanting to call in markers for all the other expenses. Well, I don't know. There's a code there somewhere about, you fool around with mobsters. Try to be a mobster. You might get treated like a mobster. Now, if only our DOJ would do something about it. And I actually think with this push to go after Russian oligarchs and their laundering of money in the United States, how can he not come across Donald Trump? And when I say he, I mean Merrick Garland. Probably already has. But the DOJ, or the way that our investigatory system and then the prosecutorial system works, is they do a bit of an end run. Once again, Al Capone was not sent to jail or prison for murder. Tax evasion. It's much worse than murder. No, it's because since they couldn't prove that Al Capone actually pulled the trigger or actually told somebody in explicit overt terms to go kill somebody, they couldn't prove that in court, but they could prove that he evaded taxes. So, and then in some cases, he was out there getting paid for murders, and he didn't claim it. He didn't claim it on his taxes. It was income. So they'll go after Donnie on an end run by all this Russian money laundered through Trump properties. You could start at the Trump Tower in New York. I mean, we got floors and floors and floors of Russian mobsters. Let alone overpriced properties in Florida that get flipped at, I don't know, let's buy it for $10 million and sell it for $60. And they did. That's how you launder money. And so maybe Donnie will get caught up in it that way. Or are they all going to get away with it again? When the Panama Papers came out, all of this was explicitly revealed. names, dates, places, and how much. Okay. I guess we're in the fight for our lives. We want representative democracy, and the authoritarians want us to tell us what to do. You're like DeSantis. I got to tell you, if I was an Ivy League school, I'd be suing anybody who says that they're Ivy League educated when you got somebody like DeSantis coming out. I mean, it's not really a good advertisement for Ivy League schools. Let's remember, George Bush is an Ivy League educated intellectual. Yeah. You don't ever say that in the same sentence usually, do you? GW intellectual. Jeez. Well, DeSantis is right there also. He's a bully. He's a frat boy bully. He plays that part very well because it's so much a part of him. It's really type. He's not acting. It is type. Seen those types before. Yep. A lot of bluster. Top heavy, too. Trying to play football, they think they can do whatever they want because they're a bully. I don't know, hit them high. They topple right over. Right in the chest. Poof. I'm serious, they topple right over. Don't go for the knees. Don't flip them like that. Nah, I just go right above the solar plexus. Shoulder right there, they usually go down. Unless they are not full of bluster and they actually know how to play the game. Then you hit them high and you might bounce off hurting your back and other parts. You got to be careful. Okay, well, enough of that. Too much machismo sitting around the campfire telling about exploits that probably happened. Probably. Isn't that how it is as the older we get? Yeah, well, a little bit of war in the world make us all feel like we're waiting for the plane at Rick's. That's right. Everybody's waiting for the plane at Rick's. 1 million were able to get out. Already, 1 million refugees out of Ukraine is the largest and fastest exodus of refugees in the history of all these conflicts. And we've had a lot, even since before Jesus. Yikes. I don't know. Maybe they want to make it like it was before Jesus. Yes, we are the Romans, and you would do what we tell you to do, and if you don't, well, it doesn't matter because you're our slaves anyway. We conquered you. Yeah, the disdain for the slave is because it's the disdain for those who allow themselves to be conquered. Mm-hmm. Maybe, I don't know, maybe we will see something that's fairly barbaric. Bring me the head of Zelensky, and they will. Here it is. Trophy time. I thought we were supposed to be a bit more civilized than that. I thought UN and NATO was supposed to mitigate these things. Of course, without the use of violence. But if we think that we're avoiding World War III by not sending some proxies to go and take out that convoy, 40-mile-long convoy, I got some advice for you. We're already there. Vlad doesn't care. He doesn't care what you do. It's all going to be the same. You don't do anything, he's going to rattle his nukes. You do something, he's going to rattle his nukes. And he might try to drop a nuke somewhere, and that's why we have the anti-nuke net that we do. About time we learned how to use it. I don't know, maybe we could call this a test. Well, we are actually trying to de-escalate. Because you know what happens to somebody like Vlad, who just cannot lose. Cannot. You don't give him an excuse to, well, shall we say, lash out. Because he's at the lash out stage at this point. And that lashing out stage can inflict a lot of damage on people. Those close by, and those a little bit further away too now. Isn't technology grand? Yes, it is. Well, we have a curated show, as I tell you, every day, 5 days a week, in the morning out here on the West Coast. I don't know where you are in the world, but thank you for listening. Looks like the listenership of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is spreading even further around the world, and Netroots Radio as well. We like to hope that we're beacons of hope and truth, or at least a way to triangulate what the truth is. I'm a bit dubious about, Spotify is still being, used in Russia. Spotify hasn't pulled back their service in Russia. So I go back and forth on that because I think Russian people really want to hear what's going on outside of their media empire, shall we say. Yeah, they got a media empire there. Because how do you triangulate if you can't get from around, you got to have at least 3 different, all right? So as I say, I'm a bit dubious about, Spotify being there, but West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy and Netroots Radio is being picked up in all of the old Soviet bloc now. Well, good. Either the FSB are listening in, or I like to hope that it's, people. People who want to know and people who care. And with hopefully a little bit of entertainment value because, hey, music soothes the soul, as they say, huh? Yeah, it does. Well, as I mentioned, we do have a curated show here for you today on Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursday. So what is in store? Well, actually, as we started off at the top, Republicans are on defense after idealizing red state Russia for years. Yeah, there's another red state. I think it's not so much Russia itself, but Vlad's Russia. Because we're not talking about people caring about Dostoevsky, who I should remind folks was thrown into jail for reading banned books that Tsarist Russia said he couldn't read. So don't give me this BS that Dostoevsky is being banned because he's Russian. And that's probably a reason why we don't want to just go carte blanche and just, everything Russian is bad. Really? I don't know. There's some pretty dense literature there, I understand. But, it's a tapestry, multi-layered. On the rest of the menu, an Alabama Oath Keeper is the first person involved in the attack on the U.S. Capitol to be convicted of seditious conspiracy. That's how rare it is. The House is poised to vote on a bill to help veterans exposed to burn pits, as promised by Joe and heckled at by Berbert and Marjorie Taylor Greene. And the federal government warns states seeking billions of dollars from the infrastructure law to widen roads, protect the safety of pedestrians and bicyclists, or risk losing the money. After the break, we move to the chef's table where OPEC is sticking with their plan to gradually increase oil production, while Russia's invasion of Ukraine rattles the world's markets. Increasing oil production will bring down the price. Maybe they don't want to do it so gradual, but they're sticking to plan. And the United States delayed a scheduled ICBM test launch in a bid to de-escalate Russia nuclear tensions. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, right there by the social media scroll. And the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. If you would look across from the chat room link to the left, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, right there is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it helps us tremendously. How? Well, it helps us pay our bills. And that way we can then fly under the radar and continue this powerhouse of resistance against dark forces arrayed against the United States. Rational reason, I know that sounds redundant, but hey, we're talking capital letters here. And, dare I say, an assault to destroy representative democracy itself. And we are a bulwark against that, and we have been so for almost 11 years because of your generosity. If you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, and if you could afford to send those funds to us once a month, even in these perilous times, it really does help us pay our bills, and it really does help us fly under the radar and continue this 24/7, 365 broadcast resistance. And it is your generosity that allows us to fulfill our civic duties as the founders originally intended so many years ago. Almost 11. Okay. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and that's what that social media scroll is over there on the right of the page. Hey there. You can follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam, and I suggest you do. Why? Well, I'll tell you why, because I post the show notes and links diary for this show on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime. And then I get it posted up on Twitter at Justice Putnam, and then I put it up on other social media platforms too, just because, hey, it's around the world now. And, so the show notes and links are where the real reportage is. And if that is a entryway into triangulating what the truth might be, so be it. You can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. And, of course, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Deep Archive is archived at the Internet Archive at archive.org. We'll get the direct link for the direct link for the show library is in the show notes that I post and then link up on social media. So find them there too. Okay, let us tuck into this first offering. Yes, that's the nomenclature when we're here in the salon. Yes, food for the soul, food for the mind, and virtual sustenance from all of the repast we have, laid before you. It's all in our minds, so imagine an abundance, a cornucopia of abundance. All right. This first offering is out of the Associated Press, and Jacques Billiot brings us this first offering. Now, the editor who put the headline for this article says, Alabama man first convicted of seditious conspiracy in riot. That was no riot. That was an insurrection. So it's important to take note. Okay. Hate getting off on the wrong foot, but we just have to be clear. An Alabama man affiliated with a far-right Oath Keepers militia group pleaded guilty yesterday to seditious conspiracy for his actions leading up and through the January 6th riot. It's not a riot. It was an insurrection, marking the first person involved in the violent attack on the U.S. Capitol to be convicted of the rarely used charge. In this instance, the sentencing guideline range for Joshua A. James. Wait a second. We don't give these convicts, these criminals, these crooks an initial. They get 3 names. Come on. Let's not minimize and whitewash this. This guy's supposed to have 3 names. Who also pleaded guilty to a charge of obstruction of an official proceeding, was estimated to be 7 1/4 to 9 years in prison. Well, good. Joshua A. James. No 3 names. Gets an initial for his middle name. I don't know. This is how the disinformation gets spread, and we all get used to it. Let's not. The 34-year-old from Arab, Alabama, well, I bet he loved coming from there, acknowledged getting into a physical altercation with a police officer while inside the Capitol and participating in a plan to use force to hinder or delay the transfer of presidential power. That sounds like an insurrection, not a riot. James also agreed to cooperate with authorities investigating the riot, including testifying before a grand jury. It was an insurrection. I just have to say, a riot in my mind doesn't have any kind of order to it necessarily. Okay, it's a mob just lashing out and breaking up everything, and it doesn't. It's just out of control. There was too much control to this. They went in to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power through the use of violent force. That is not a riot. I gotta have a talk with that editor. Authorities say James and others affiliated with the group rode golf carts to the Capitol. Who got them the golf carts? That's not what you do at a riot. Moved through the crowd in a military-style stack formation and went into the building. That is not a riot. Authorities say James was accused of pushing past officers who tried to stop rioters from moving towards the rotunda, joining others who confronted officers and profanely proclaiming the building was his. A week before the riot, James said in an encrypted chat that he believed teams within the militia group were adequately armed, prosecutors said in court records. They do that in sort of like just a riot? While 4 other people connected with the Oath Keepers have pleaded guilty to obstruction of Congress and a lesser conspiracy charge. James is the first among the 11 people associated with the group to plead guilty to a seditious conspiracy charge. The seditious conspiracy prosecution is the boldest publicly known attempt so far by the government to prosecute those who attacked the U.S. Capitol. The group's founder, One-Eyed Stu, or otherwise known as Stuart Rhodes. One-Eyed Stu. I like that. I made that up, just so you know. And others have pleaded not guilty to seditious conspiracy and other charges, which means they can still be convicted of it. A seditious conspiracy conviction carries a maximum penalty of 20 years, compared with 5 years on the lesser conspiracy charge facing other group members. Yeah, well, they'll probably give them probation. That's how it works with these right-wing white guys who have connections to law enforcement. Let's not sugarcoat this. Those charged with seditious conspiracy are accused of working together to use force to stop the peaceful transfer of presidential power. Authorities say participants discussed their plans in encrypted chats, traveled to the nation's capital from across the country, organized into teams, used military tactics, stashed weapons in case they felt they were needed, and communicated with each other during the riot on January 6, 2021. Everything they described up there was not a riot. I know. It's seditious conspiracy. What is that? That is an insurrection. Okay. Prosecutors say the group set up a quick reaction force, or a QRF, They kept guns at a hotel in nearby Arlington, Virginia, and were prepared to bring those weapons into Washington if One-Eyed Stu, I made that up, Stuart Rhodes or associates believed the need arose. Days before the attack, one defendant suggested getting a boat to ferry weapons across the Potomac River, just like George Washington. In the end, the QRF teams did not bring guns into Washington. At the Capitol, Oath Keepers marched in two teams in stack formation, with team members advancing forward with one hand on the shoulder of the person in front of them. Looks really good on TV too, doesn't it? The longest prison sentence handed down so far to a January 6th rioter, I think they're called insurgents, was given to Robert Palmer of Largo, Florida. Palmer, who was sentenced to 5.5 years in prison, acknowledged hurling a wooden plank at officers protecting a Capitol entrance, spraying a fire extinguisher, then throwing it when it was done. The attack resulted in the deaths of 5 people, including a police officer. More than 100 officers were injured. Rioters caused over $1 million in damage. I think, actually, I would edit that to say insurgents caused over $1 million in damage. Kevin Frecking of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays. The House is poised to pass legislation that would dramatically boost healthcare services and disability benefits for veterans exposed to burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan. The bill, set for a vote today, Thursday, has the backing of the nation's major veterans group and underscores the continued cost of war years after the fighting has stopped. If passed into law, it would increase spending by more than $300 billion over the next decade, according to the CBO. The bill would open up Department of Veteran Affairs health care to millions of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans exposed to toxic substances during their service, even if they don't have a service-connected disability. The bill also would provide new or increased disability benefits to thousands of veterans who have become ill with cancer or respiratory conditions such as bronchitis or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. The VA would presume that veterans develop their illness as a result of exposure to toxic substances during their time in service. Of the Associated Press brings us this final offering in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The federal government has a new warning to states seeking billions of dollars from President Joe Biden's infrastructure law to widen roads, protect the safety of pedestrians and bicyclists, or risk losing the money. In a report submitted to Congress and made public yesterday, Wednesday, the Department of Transportation says it will aim to prioritize the safety and health of all the users of today's modern roadway, from riders of public transit and electric scooters to Uber rideshare pickups and people delivering goods. Projects such as bike paths and traffic roundabouts, enhanced sidewalks, pedestrian pathways to bus stops, and transit lanes will be favored in the distribution of the money. The department, led by Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, wants to change a long-time focus by the states that directed federal money toward adding car lanes to relieve congestion and increase speed, often at the cost of mostly non-white communities living next to the busy roadways. I have a little advice for you folks wanting to build more freeways. We really experimented with that quite well out here on the West Coast. You know what we found? If you build it, they will congest it. Okay, let's go to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world. And we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. Air pollution causes millions of premature deaths around the world every year, according to an estimate by the World Health Organization. And one of the most significant drivers of air pollution in cities is the exhaust that comes out of tailpipes from cars, trucks, and buses. In an effort to tame its air pollution, the city of Hong Kong has deployed a system that can sense when a highly polluting vehicle drives by.
There are more than 150 sites for the monitoring of vehicle emissions in Hong Kong, so that high-emitting vehicles can be identified quickly and enforced for repair.
John Zhou is an environmental engineer at the University of Technology, Sydney, and he's co-author on a new analysis of that program in the journal Science Advances. He says the system works like this. Sensors at road level shoot beams of light across the road to a reflector. The sensors then measure how much light is absorbed by pollutants and roughly calculate emissions from passing vehicles. At the same time, the system's reading license plates, and it sends notices to big polluters. Enforcement began in 2014. In the following 4 years, the program pulled 16,000 vehicles off the road, mostly taxis, but also private cars and buses. Government subsidies helped to fix up 96% of those vehicles and ensured they passed smog tests.
Hopefully from the publication of this research, we can raise awareness about the effectiveness of getting the heavy polluting vehicles off the road.
The repairs cut pollutants like carbon monoxide and nitrogen oxides from the city's air, and that spared people from breathing them in. But the repairs had another effect too.
By reducing the pollution from the tailpipe, we'll also simultaneously increase the performance of fuel combustion in vehicles. So at least it's indirectly contributing to the reduction of fuel, and so therefore the reduction of greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide.
By cleaning up its air, Zhou says Hong Kong has cut carbon emissions too. That's a win-win for people in the city and beyond. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
In the American colonies and in the early republic, women did not have basic political and economic rights. For example, women typically could not vote or hold office. Women's property rights were limited too. Indentured servants and free and enslaved African American women had even fewer rights. And yet, in the 1800s, women began to organize to demand equal rights. The first National Convention for Women's Suffrage, that is, the right of women to vote, took place in Seneca Falls in New York in 1848. But the suffrage movement would ultimately not achieve success until 1920, with the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which recognized the right of women to vote. But there was a catch. Although in theory the 19th Amendment applied to African American women and women of any ethnicity, discriminatory voting policies in the states meant that women of color were often denied their constitutional right to vote. This would change only with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The struggle for full equality continues to this day, particularly in the workplace, with the Me Too movement exposing continuing problems with sexual harassment and with disparities in pay between men and women, among many other challenges. This has been 60 Second Civics, a podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage.
Are you, am I, are we putting democracy at risk? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. According to a recent Washington Post poll, 70% of Republicans believe that the 2020 presidential election was illegitimate. Wow. 70% of the people who identify with one of the two major political parties in America subscribe to a falsehood, a lie? How is this possible? Here's one explanation. 82% of Fox News viewers believe the election was stolen. 82%. For viewers of the ultra-far-right news distributors, it's closer to 100%. Many media analysts believe that those numbers result from people living in news silos, a phenomenon that happens among people of different political persuasions and personal beliefs. News silos. Many viewers and listeners turning to media that reinforces their existing opinions and ideas. Those media outlets then deliver content that over and over again reinforces those ideas. This phenomenon is dangerous. In order for facts to prevail over prevarications, we as a nation depend on ourselves, the body politic, to participate collectively in what we call a free marketplace of ideas. But as that marketplace becomes more like a series of company-owned stores, as news silos become more the norm, democracy increasingly is put at grave risk. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
Our local newspapers are being merged, purged, shrunk, shut down, and looted by Wall Street profiteers. Yet, there's good news. In the towns those media vultures are torching, a phoenix is rising. Hundreds of determined locals, often led by people of color, are finding new ways to pay for and revive top-quality local journalism. For example, the Ferndale Enterprise moved to an old Victorian home, renting upstairs rooms to vacationers to subsidize the paper. Also, while aloof Wall Street owners have no connection to us or our towns, the scrappy new community papers are stressing their grassroots connection by moving into friendlier, more central, street-level spaces such as public libraries and community centers, so that regular people can see them and have direct access to their reporters and editors. Then there's the editor of the Sahan Journal in Minneapolis, who moves his weekly editorial meeting to the offices of various grassroots groups so their members can help shape the paper's coverage. And in Marfa, Texas, the Big Bend Sentinel is literally serving the public, not only with a good weekly, but also with the Sentinel, a combo coffee shop, cozy bar, cafe, event space, and hangout for locals to meet and greet. In ways big and small, dedicated local journalists are experimenting with funding, structure, staffing, etc. to produce the news that democracy requires. Note to Wall Street vultures, these newspaper ventures aren't interested in scaling up to maximize investor profits. As they know, it was corporate cost-cutting, consolidation, and scaling that got us into today's mess of journalistic collapse. And, unlike the Wall Street model, their success is not measured simply by financial return, but also by how they do at keeping citizens informed and engaged. This is Jim Hightower saying, now that's real journalism.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Are you a trade union worker? Have you ever worked at a prevailing wage job site? Then today in labor history is an important day for you. The year was 1931. Congress passed the Davis-Bacon Act. This act required that any new construction or repair of a public building or public works project of more than $2,000 that included federal funding must pay a prevailing wage. The legislation was named for the bill's architects, New York Republican Congressman Robert Bacon and Pennsylvania Republican Senator James Davis. The prevailing wage refers to a standard local wage. By maintaining a standard wage, this ensures that contractors could not win bids on federal projects by driving down labor costs or providing less than quality work. The goal was to protect the workers and ease the volatility of the construction industry. There have been criticisms of the law. At the law's passing, white workers dominated the construction trade unions. Prevailing wage laws ensured that construction bosses could not bring in cheaper, non-unionized black labor to underbid the union construction labor. This meant that many black workers effectively found themselves barred from federal construction projects. Like many of the gains made by labor at the time, the benefits were not equally distributed along the lines of race and gender. Today, on an annual basis, roughly between 20% of all construction projects in the United States fall under the jurisdiction of the Davis-Bacon law. Unions also regularly organize to encourage private construction projects to honor these laws. Prevailing wage remains one of the most important legal protections for trade union labor. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the United States of America, where it is currently 44 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of about 50. A little bit cooler than yesterday. Overcast skies. Currently, we had a little less than a quarter inch of rainfall last night. It looks like we're won't be having rain falling. I wouldn't call it a drying out, actually. Winds will be out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Mainly cloudy tonight. Winds light and variable. Lows in the mid-30s. And then cloudy early tomorrow with showers in the morning and afternoon hours. And winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Highs will be in the mid-40s. And yes, confirmed cases of coronavirus continue to rise in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon. We now have confirmed cases standing at 420,097, though our deceased totals remain at 480. Pollen is rated as none right outside the window in Rogue River proper. The air quality index is good at 39 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is in the moderate range at level 3. Barometric pressure is rising at 30.09 inches. Visibility is at 7 miles, and relative humidity is at 97%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. London is 55 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 55 and mostly cloudy. Rome is 57 and fair. Kyiv is 34 and cloudy. Kabul is 41 and fair. Hong Kong is 62 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 45 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 71 degrees and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 50 and cloudy. And New York, New York is 40 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Busowitz of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The leaders of OPEC and its oil-producing allies are sticking with their plan to gradually increase oil production while Russia's invasion of Ukraine rattles markets, reshapes alliances, kills civilians, and sends the price of crude skyrocketing. The OPEC Plus coalition of oil producers made up of OPEC members led by Saudi Arabia and non-cartel members led by Russia chose to increase oil production by 400,000 barrels per day in April. Since July, the coalition has been adding the amount of oil each month to gradually restore deep cuts to production made early in the pandemic when demand for fuel plummeted. People have been driving and flying more as COVID-19 restrictions have eased in parts of the world, but the amount of oil on the market has not kept up with demand. OPEC's decision to stick with only modest supply increases while Russia is waging a war is likely to prolong higher oil and gas prices. A feature, not a bug.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Phil Stewart and Idris Ali of Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The U.S. military said it will postpone a scheduled test launch of a Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile in a bid to lower soaring tensions after Russia announced it was putting its nuclear forces on high alert. Putin's weekend announcement on the heightened alert posture fanned fears that Russia's invasion of Ukraine could lead to nuclear escalation, with some European officials seeing it as a veiled threat to the West. Well, in this reporter's opinion, not so veiled. Putin's foreign minister, Mr. No Lavrov, was quoted on yesterday, warning that a third world war would be a nuclear conflict. Remarks that added to growing unease. The Pentagon strongly condemned Russian rhetoric surrounding the world's most destructive weaponry and said it hoped its decision to delay its ICBM test would serve as an example to Moscow. Vlad doesn't care. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Coër. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.